This presentation will discuss how a physiotherapist will use the principles of sport and exercise science to help a netballer with an ACL injury return to their sport. Motivation is an essential component in the role of a physiotherapist when helping a netballer with an ACL injury stay committed to a rehab program in order to minimize recovery time so they can return to their sport. Motivation is based on the direction of one's effort alongside the intensity and perseverance portrayed by the athlete recovering from the injury. The self-determination theory suggests that the spectrum of motivation consists of amotivation, a deficiency in effort and beliefs, extrinsic motivation involving reasons external for the activity itself, and intrinsic motivation, which is high self-determination. Based on this, physiotherapists aiming to develop the motivation of an injured netballer must increase one's intrinsic motivation to develop the athlete's stimulation, accomplishment, and knowledge. The basic psychological needs for a recovering athlete are competence, involving one's engagement, autonomy, the degree to which one feels in control of their behavior, and relatedness, the way in which an individual is connected to others. To minimize the recovery time for a netball player with an ACL injury, it is essential that the physiotherapist communicates supportive behaviors across all three areas of the basic psychological needs. Autonomy supportive behaviors from the physiotherapist should provide the injured athlete with a high level of choice. However, this must be within specific limits in order to have rules and provide a structured rehabilitation plan for the athlete, which is enjoyable to ensure they stay committed. In addition to this, in order to allow the athlete to feel in control of their behavior, it is essential for the physiotherapist to provide opportunities to allow the athlete to take initiative for certain aspects of their recovery. From this, the physiotherapist can provide non-controlling competence feedback, avoiding criticisms and tangible rewards to prevent ego involvement. In addition to this, competence supportive behaviors are vital when discussing communication between the athlete and the physio in order to provide positive feedback and encouragement during and after sessions so the athlete is more likely to engage in future tasks. Competence supportive behaviors involve the physiotherapist helping the athlete to focus on learning the skill within a sufficient timescale as opposed to learning the outcome itself. This is essential for a netball player recovering from an ACL injury, as the physiotherapist needs to focus on specific exercises and skills to strengthen the injury before progressing these movements to reach the outcome. Finally, relatedness supportive behaviors have a huge impact on the athlete as they provide the athlete with a strong connection to their significant figures such as their coach, teammates, and the physio themselves in order to develop positive relationships. Relatedness supportive behaviors portrayed by the physio demonstrate willingness to care for the injured athlete, which provides empathy and support for their feelings towards the different exercises and movements prescribed. As a result, the athlete will be more likely to engage in the tasks in order to minimize recovery time. Intrinsic and extrinsic motivation are viewed as a continuum ranging from amotivation to various types of extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. For a physiotherapist to increase intrinsic motivation within an athlete, it is essential to use verbal and non-verbal methods of praise in order to involve the athlete in decision-making, such as setting their own realistic goals in which they can work towards. In addition to this, it's suggested that for a physiotherapist to increase motivation, it is essential to set rewards contingent on performance using an autonomy supportive approach. Another important aspect of the role of a physiotherapist in increasing intrinsic motivation within an athlete is to vary the sequence of exercises and movements to ensure the athletes stay focused on recovery and to prevent boredom within the rehabilitation plan.
Biomechanics is a key component in recovering from an injury to get the athlete back into their fittest form and also improving performance and bettering their general well-being. Physiotherapists can use biomechanics to improve an ACL injury by looking over what type of movements are used and what planes of motion are required in their sport. The frontal plane is used during weight-bearing exercises, which include walking and running. In these movements, the ground reaction force goes through medially to the centre of the knee joint, which include mainly the iliotibial band and the lateral collateral ligament. The varus movement creates a greater compressive force between the compartment of the knee, meaning that there is more of a chance for an ACL injury to occur. Another reason can be that the diminished hip strength, the hip is closer to the lower body of the kinematic chain, which shares a common part with the femur and the knee. Not having strong muscles in the hip can cause excessive knee valgus. In netball, it is important to have strong muscles and ligaments, as the sports require a lot of explosive movements. The transverse plane is when you rotate a limb or your torso around a vertical axis. Examples of this would be rotating in the air when jumping, supination of the arm, or rotating your foot when pivoting. Twisting and rotating movements are very common in netball. However, this is the reason why ACL injuries are more common due to the mixture of frontal and transverse planes of motion, which causes the ACL to stretch and bend due to the constant pivoting and changing of direction, which would be conclusive to the excessive knee valgus, or twisting of the knee, which will occur the ligaments to be put into a strenuous position. The vitro studies have demonstrated that ACL injuries occur more frequently in the frontal and transverse planes because these are the movements in which tension occurs. The physio will be able to use video analysis of their performance and progress through the range of motion. This will enable the physio to see any improvements. It would also allow them to move and any underlying problems, such as knee valgus or weak posterior chain. The physio may also look back on the videos of the athletes to analyse her movements and give them stretching and stabilising movements to help with the injury prevention. It is important to look at the movement in the transverse and frontal planes, as this is where ACL injuries occur.
Biomechanics helps provide a detailed analysis of the athlete's movements and techniques prior to injury and after. This helps with seeing progression during the treatment and compare the injured athlete's abilities before and after. This helps get them back to their highest level so that they compete in their sport again. It also looks to strengthen the injured point, which will be a weak point of movement for the athlete. Biomechanics also provides a platform to see where these injuries are happening the most, and how to practice a better technique to prevent the injury from happening. For example, the evolution of the rugby tackle in recent history. Rugby tackles have changed in technique significantly since the 80s and 90s. You're required to wrap and keep the tackle below the line of the shoulders. This is to protect the opponent getting tackled and the player committing the tackle. From a young age, you are taught to tackle cheek to cheek, as the player is more likely to land on their front than their back. Another thing biomechanics can look at to prevent injuries is how the dimensions of the pitch can be changed to decrease velocity, which will ultimately decrease force. An example of this was the change of the centre circle in Australian rules football. The centre circle is where the ball is bounced in a smaller circle within the centre circle, and the two tallest players must run to this circle and compete for the ball, similar to netball, but slightly more brutal. The outer circle, which is 10 metres, like a diameter, where the players start, was introduced in 2005 to decrease force and prevent injury, which worked as PCL injuries significantly decreased from 12.9 per 10,000 player hours in the 1999 to 2004 seasons to 5.9 per 10,000 player hours in the 2005 to 2008 player seasons.
There are two types of muscle fibre types, slow and fast twitch fibres. For netball, it is important that the athlete develops her fast twitch fibres. This is because netball training sessions are classified as skills, game-based, traditional conditioning or repeated high-intensity effort training. As we are working on a netballer, which is predominantly a female sport, research has shown that males predominantly use slow twitch muscle fibres and females use fast twitch. This again shows why it is more relevant for a physio to train fast twitch fibres. Fast twitch muscle fibres generate energy for ATP resynthesis via the anaerobic energy pathways. They have several characteristics: high potentiation threshold, high myosin ATPase activity, well-developed SR for fast CA2 release and uptake ability and shortening speed, high glycolytic capacity, low myoglobin and mitochondria volume, high fatigability, and ideally suited for short duration anaerobic type activity. As a physio, during the athlete's recovery, they need to incorporate activities which require fast twitch muscle fibres, for example, sprint training, jumping, and agility work. Individuals with a greater ratio of fast to slow twitch muscle fibers are potentially able to produce greater force. This is why it's important for the physio to work on activities which produce fast twitch muscle fibers in the athlete, because in netball, they will be required to do a lot of jumping and sudden bursts of movement, which require a lot of force. In a study, it was found that fast-twitch oxidative glycolytic fibers in sedentary humans were observed less frequently. This shows why an active netballer would be different to this. The ratio of muscle fiber type is genetically determined by birth. However, with training, the transition between the muscle fiber types is feasible. Fast-twitch fibers can be classified into 3 primary subtypes: type 11A, type 11X, and type 11C. When the athlete is going through their rehab, the physio needs to be aware of the all or none principle of muscle contraction. When there is a need for a muscle to generate force, in order to perform a physical task, the all or none principle of muscle contraction comes into play. It is initiated by a stimulus. However, if the stimulus is not of sufficient intensity, the muscle fibers will not respond and contraction will not take place. If the physio wants to see the muscle fiber which is most prominent in the athlete, then they can perform a muscle fiber biopsy. To do this, a biopsy needle is inserted into incision, which is made with a scalpel. A close-up of the tissue sample is then looked at. Photomyograph will then identify the fiber type. All muscle fibers have the potential to increase in size as a result of resistance type training, because all muscle fiber types are recruited in consecutive size order to produce high levels of force.
Sport performance analysis is a process which allows investigation on performance within sports. It's able to understand the actions that is created from the decisions making, maximize performance, and supports the athletes and coaches to optimize their results. This allows physios to understand how the injury is created. The athlete with the ACL injuries may have had a poor body position or technique, which is causing them to have sports injuries. To help the netball player with the ACL injury, we watch videos as they are key methods to analyze movements, as they help identify certain habits which cause injuries and pain. After the action is discovered, we are able to teach the athlete the correct technique to stop further pain and a new injury. Within the netball team or player is able to be analysed on their techniques when playing the matches or training sessions. For example, if they are landing correctly when jumping to snatch the ball or doing training such as deadlifts, which can cause an ACL injury if done incorrectly. Another thing the athlete can be analysed is their movement. For example, running-based movements such as acceleration, deceleration, and change in directions. They are identified if they are being done correctly. Time motion analysis is a type of investigation which looks at the work rate of the other player within the match or training sessions and the movements they perform when doing so. To be able to identify where the ACL injury has come from, we will need to do perform a time motion analysis. This is able to identify which movement is incorrect, so we are able to correct them to prevent future injuries and additional pain. Netball is a team sport, which makes it complex with the movements as they are formed from technical situations arising in the game, underlining the movements that are unpredictable. So in training, it's hard to learn specific movements as in the match anything can happen. However, if we use time motion analysis, we are able to investigate the movements and work rate of the netball players. From using the time motion analysis, we gather information such as position rules, score lines, effects, fatigue, and the level of competition. All this data will be used to create a training program. This is highly beneficial to the netballers with ACL injury, as we can create a training program which suits her and works around her body, also helping the recovery and prevention of the injury. Within netball, there's a range of movement patterns which will need to be practiced to be successful in the game. Practicing the netball movements, your body will become used to the pressure on the joints. This will increase the development of the classification system. For netball players with the ACL injury has done running with The netballer with the ACL injury has done running with turns and twists, which created a significant rupture on the ligaments in the lower body. To prevent this from occurring, the netball player will need to do strength training in order to prevent the injury. Technique analyst uses the concept that if you have a good technique, your performance level in sport will increase, but if you have bad technique, the performance will decrease. There are two types of techniques analysts, such as performance analysts, which is quantitative based on specific rules and subjects' observations. The other is biomechanics, which is a quantitative, which is able to be conducted from kinetic or temporal. Quantitative analysis is going to be a key method in order to heal the ACL injury, as it analyzes the movements within the sport. For example, when the netballers are doing a toss-up or snatch, the netball players may land incorrectly, creating an ACL injury. By analysing the movements, we're able to correct them in the right technique by doing videos that can be slowed down or be seen by the naked eye. This is important for the physiotherapists, as they are able to see how the injury has occurred.
Thank you for listening.
Okay, now my heart rate's going so crazy. I messed up so much.
No, it wasn't that bad. It was only near the end, but it's too long.